I'm Sam Fortner. I'm the Edgefield Catering Manager, and I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. This is really a fantastic turnout, so thank you, everyone. Okay, first of all, J. Patrick Barry is one of our presenters here tonight. J. Patrick. All right, J. Patrick Barry has been the supervisory park ranger in charge of the Bonneville Lock and Dam Visitor Center since 1988. His career as a ranger for the federal government spans 34 years. Currently employed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Pat started his career with the National Park Service, where he worked here in Oregon at Crater Lake, among other places. Pat is also the lead instructor for the Corps' Interpretive Services courses and a member of and a trainer for the National Association for Interpretation. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
All right, we also have Len Otto. He retired from a 31-year career as an elementary educator in the community in which he grew up, Troutdale. Len Otto presently pursues his lifelong passion for history by recording and publishing people's life stories. He also has edited 2 of local author Sharon Nesbitt's book. I think Sharon's here. Yes? There she is. It Could Have Been Clarkdale, A Centennial History of Troutdale, and Sunny with Occasional Tirades, a collection of Sharon Nesbitt's columns for the Gresham Outlet. Len presently volunteers for the Troutdale Historical Society as the chair of the exhibit committee. A major exhibit he is helping plan is the 2016 Centennial Celebration of the historic Columbia River Highway, also known as the King of Roads. Leo grew up alongside the start of this incredible highway. Len, I'm sorry. Len grew up alongside the start of this incredible highway and is excited to help others learn about its magic. While not quite old enough to have experienced the 1948 flood in person, Len heard his mother often tell her story. Once he realized the significance of the story, he sat down with a camcorder and interviewed her so that her words and memories could be preserved for family members and others to hear. Part of that video is shown in this portion of the program tonight. So thank you again, everyone, for showing up. And I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Sam. I would like to invite people who are having trouble seeing this tiny, tiny screen to come up here. Unfortunately, we don't have any chairs, but maybe you could bring a chair, or you could sit on the floor or stand around the edges. Anybody want to do that? Be a lot easier to see. I'm going to give you a minute to think about that. And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to give you a little weather report right now. Right now at Bonneville Dam, 306,000 cubic feet per second are passing the dam. 306,000 cubic feet per second. And upstream of the dam, the water level is 73 feet above sea level. Downstream, it is 24 feet above sea level. Keep that in mind as we talk tonight, because you're going to see some different numbers. So anybody else want to move? Here's your chance. Well, if you get frustrated, you can't see the pictures, go ahead and move. I want to acknowledge that we have several experts in the audience, which is a little intimidating for me, because we have a gentleman here, for example, who worked in the water management department at the Corps of Engineers for his entire career. And my former boss is sitting in the back there. I told him the last time I was here was 7 years ago when he retired. His party was here. So, all right. So, thank you all for coming. So, if you don't mind. So we're going to kind of get into a little bit of quick history of Bonneville Dam, what happened at the dam, what happened in the Columbia Basin, what changes were brought about because of the 1948 flood. Will it happen again? Everybody's wondering. I know this guy is right here. He's in a low-lying area. And then we'll give you some more information. Okay, so that's what we're going to get through. So, Bonneville Dam was built back during the Great Depression. It was a public works project. And we got a lot of infrastructure built during the Great Depression, which was amazing. And we've really benefited from this. I view this stuff as gifts from our ancestors. And it was really built for three reasons. It was built to raise the water level behind the dam to cover up the Cascade Rapids, which were considered to be an obstacle for navigation. It was built to generate electricity, certainly, and it was built to create thousands of jobs during the Great Depression, which it did. 3,000 jobs in Bonneville and many, many jobs elsewhere throughout the United States where people built equipment that was ultimately used at the dam. Notice what's not there. Do you see flood reduction or flood prevention? Do you see that? It is not a purpose for building Bonneville Dam. And we'll get into that as we go on. Thanks. So yeah, it started during the Great Depression. I've met some of the people who built the dam. I've been working there since '88. People walked in, they told me some great stories. They all wanted to tell me exactly what they built. So some fascinating stories, but that's another topic. I won't get into that now. My favorite shot, Bonneville Dam. Got 50 people sitting on top of one of the turbines. This is one of the first turbines to go in. And enjoy that picture because OSHA won't let us do that anymore. So it's not the way we do business anymore. So I just wanted to show you that picture. That's the only reason that slide was there. So the original construction, on the left is the Bonneville landslide, which occurred about 460 years ago, and blocked the river. And eventually when the river broke through, it created the Cascade Rapids, which was a big reason why the dam was built at that time, at that location. So things changed a little bit later on. Next one, please. The second powerhouse was completed in 1982. It doubled our output to, right now we're at just over 1,200 megawatts, which is enough power for about 900,000 houses. And then we had another construction project. The original lock, which was a very large lock at the time, was replaced in '93 because after the original Bonneville lock was built, 7 more locks were built between Bonneville and Lewiston, Idaho. So we added a larger lock in 1993, and now they're all comparable in size, so that vessels can go through. And we move up to 10 million tons of commodities through the locks every year. So we also have added fish bypass improvements. This is really kind of driven by the Endangered Species Act of 1973. And we've met our goals for getting juvenile salmon downstream, which is a really, really big, important part of fish passage at the dam. So that's just a little background about the dam. So let's get back to 1948. Oh, before I do that, here's the dam today. So of these islands, you see 3 islands. The only one that was there in 1948 was the one in the middle. That was, it's called Bradford Island. And if any of you have been to the visitor center at Bonneville Dam on the Oregon side, that's where that's located. Okay. So now let's get back to 1948. So in 1948, the dam was there. It was up to 10 generators because it started out with only 2, with the prediction that we'll never need all that electricity. But 1948 started out like a normal year. And let's move on here. But then all of a sudden this sequence of events started to occur. So in April, by April of 1948, there was anywhere from 20 to 42% above average snowpack. And the weather stayed cold into the spring. The weather stayed cold until about mid-May. May 19th to 23rd, 26th to 29th, we got some very, very heavy rains. So what happens when it rains on lots of snow? It melts. May 24th, the Dalles-Celilo Canal was inundated. That used to be the way vessels got around Celilo Falls. 1.01 million cubic feet per second was recorded at the Dalles. And that volume kept above 900,000 cubic feet per second for over 3 weeks. In May of 1927, McNairy Dam, which was under construction, the Coffer Dam was overtopped. So you can imagine they said something like, oh darn, when that happened. The Loa levee at Clatskanie was topped as well. May 29th, which was, I was -3 on May 29th, 1948. State Police, National Guard responded to flooding and looting. Roads were becoming undermined and being washed away. Next one. May 30th, Portland flooded north of the seawall. And May 30th at 4:17 p.m., the SPS railroad embankment failed. My public affairs officer made sure I wanted to say that that was an SPS railroad embankment that failed, not a Corps of Engineers levee. Within minutes, the gap widened to 600 feet. Within 2 hours, Vanport was completely inundated. 15 lives were lost in Vanport. And flooding worsened during the next 14 days as the storms continued. Portland Airport flooded. But by June 23rd, water returned to safe levels and life started getting a little bit more back to normal. One of the stories I found as I was researching actually came from our district commander at the time, Colonel Walsh. There was a crew foreman on May 30th. He noticed a crack in the railroad embankment and called the Corps of Engineers inspector. While they were looking at this crack, the entire section seemed to disappear, and both the foreman and the inspector had to run for their lives. So the damage was extensive. Up to 51 lives were lost throughout the region. I've seen different numbers depending upon which author you read. Maybe you have a different number yourself. The damage in the United States part of the Columbia River was over $100 million. Remember, this is 1948 dollars. At least 46,000 people lost their homes. At least 5,000 buildings were destroyed. 100,000 acres of agricultural land eroded. 15,000 acres of commercial, industrial, or urban land flooded. So this was a big deal. There were flood fighters out there, just as you see on the news today, if there's a flood anywhere. At least 2,000 Army military personnel, mostly Army, and 5,000 civilian as well. And they were doing things like putting out sandbags, reinforcing banks and levees, search and rescue, and emergency assistance. So that was really what they were up to. They were out there doing whatever needed to be done. So if you just hit play.
Where is play?
Just double click it.
Wait,
let me fix
Let me
this.
back up here.
Okay.
I'm a Macintosh guy.
I'm
lost.
Hold on.
Back up right there. And right there.
Let's try this.
They're all different. There we go.
Maybe. Okay. So this kind of has a home movie quality about it, but it was actually professionally done. I can't really explain the beginning of this movie. It looks like a group visiting Bonneville Dam. People have been doing that really since '48. That's when the first visitor center went in. First visitor center later got relocated up at Cascade Lock. So when you board the Sternwheeler Gorge, Columbia Gorge, you are actually passing through the old visitor center at Bonneville Dam. But here it is, a nice sunny day in 1948. Life is good. And all of a sudden you look upstream, there's the spillway, quite a bit of water. You look upstream, you see some ominous signs. There's the spillway. If you looked at this today, it would be about probably half or less of the water that's going through it right now. Dan, what was that number?
That was the question I was going to ask you.
Yeah, but you know the answer, I don't. It was over 400,000 cubic feet a second.
I think Kevin, I remember talking to the old timers, they're talking a million cubic feet per second.
1 million cubic feet per second passing the dam, yeah, but through the spillway. Apparently zoom lenses were just introduced at that time, so you can zoom in on that. But if you've seen Bonneville Dam, this should look staggering to you because I'm used to seeing a pretty significant flow. Like right now, we're putting out 300,000 cubic feet per second. Over 1 million cubic feet per second is a whole different ballgame. If you're wondering what this is, on the left is the fish ladder, and it's been overtopped. And that brownish looking stuff on the side is all driftwood that's come down the river. They piled up rocks along the side to push them in to reinforce the bank. This is Bradford Island, where the current visitor center is. Again, there's the fish ladder full of wood debris. and it's being overtopped by the river at that point. Some houses on the North Bonneville side of the river, and a road along North Bonneville side being eroded. Would you want to drive on that road? Probably not. Bulldozers to the rescue. What they're doing here is they're removing material from the bottom of the river so they can load it into trucks and use it to reinforce the shorelines. And the crane, get a look at the crane when you'll see it come into view. I believe, I'm not certain, but I believe that's a crane they used to refer to as the Monaghan. It was a walking crane made by the Bucyrus Crane Company. It just had these big wheels on the sides, and it walked from one place to another. But it's about one bucket per truck. Aren't you glad you don't live there? Here we're looking upstream of the first powerhouse where they're trying to move debris that is probably clogging the intakes to the turbines. And we still have that crane bucket, by the way. And now we're downstream of the powerhouse. When you drive to Bonneville Dam, if you go to the visitor center, you drive across that roadway. But the water is much lower. Right here, it's about, that roadway, by the way, is at 55 feet above sea level. So the water is just at about 48 feet above sea level. Today, it's 24 feet above sea level. All right, so what I'm going to show you next is I've got some then and now pictures. This movie's just about over. Oh yeah, some spillway shots. Poor fish ladder underwater again. All right. So here we are. This is this month. We're down below the old navigation lock, and notice in the middle of the picture there's a stairway right here. Watch what happens to that stairway in the next picture, 1948. There's that same stairway right there. We're down to about 10 steps. So the difference between 48 feet above sea level downstream of the dam and 24 or 23 feet above sea level. Let's look at the next one. Here's the basement of the warehouse. We have our own warehouse at Bonneville Dam where we keep supplies. This was last week. This is 1948, full of water. The drains were below 48 feet above sea level, so they were draining uphill into the river, which didn't work so well. We have since fixed that. First powerhouse, lower roadway. Now notice the height of the roadway above the water. You see that? Here's 1948. About 7 feet was the only difference there between the roadway and the water level. Here's the spillway today, or last week actually, but very similar to what's going on today. That's normal. There's 1948. Now, could you go back to the previous slide? Look at the difference in the gates. See how much of the gates are showing? Look at the next picture. See how little of the gates are showing? And if you look at the top on the next picture, those black things on top of the spillway are the tops of the gates. So they're open to, I spoke with our structural crew for him, and he said they're about 50% open in that picture. Upstream of the powerhouse, this is a wall that separates what used to be the first 6 generators of the powerhouse when it was finished in 1941 from the last 4 generators when it was finished in 1943. So there's that same wall. And a bit of a debris problem back there as well. They estimated that the water level up there was probably 83 to 85 feet above sea level. And today it is 73 feet above sea level. And then this is a fish ladder on the south side of the spillway. That's the way it is now. There's 1948. Could you go back and forth between those a couple of times, Len? 1948, today. See a bit of a difference? It almost looks like a different place. Okay, thanks. An upstream view of the spillway today. Again, we're at 73 feet above sea level. More like 83 to 85 feet above sea level. That was May 25th. That wasn't even the height of the flood. That was just getting into it. 1948.
Oops.
What? Oh, 2014. I'm sorry. We'll put this show together anyway. So if you've seen Bonneville Dam and you've seen the spillway, you can just, I've never seen water coming out. I was there in 96. And 96 was a big flood, but nothing like this. Nothing like this. So let's move on. So the water, 56% of the water for this flood came from Canada. I'm not trying to think. If anybody's from Canada, I'm not blaming you. It's just a fact. But what this did, though, this really led to a treaty between the United States and Canada, and that treaty is being renegotiated right now. So if this is something that concerns you, you have the right to provide input to this treaty right now, because they're making discussions about it, and the Corps of Engineers is certainly providing their input to this treaty. In response to the 1948 flood, there was something called the 531 report, and the 531 report really led to the construction of many dams. And the thing that all these dams have in common is storage. Because prior to the 1948 flood, the Columbia River system did not have a lot of storage capacity. Not a lot at all. And still, compared to some rivers, we don't have a lot today, compared to even the Missouri or the Colorado, certainly, but in proportion to how much water comes down. Also, levee construction increased back then. So dams like Mica, Duncan, Keenlyside in Canada, Libby, Albany Falls, John Day, and Dworshak, these were all really spurred on by the 1948 flood. To put this into perspective, the bigger the circle on this map, the more water it can store. See where the big storage dams are? British Columbia. Okay. All right, next slide. So could it happen again? The answer is yes, but. Today, we've got a lot more ability to forecast. Some of the people who work in the Corps of Engineers Water Management Department are right in this room right now. So let's give them a round of applause for the hard work that they do. These people are on top of this. They look at patterns, they look at weather conditions, they look at snow melt, they look at snowpack, they look at incoming weather, and they can do things like draft reservoirs to reduce the flood potential. They'll draw down the reservoirs to make room for when the water is coming. So we have a lot more storage in the Columbia and in the Willamette than we did in 1948. Not everything got built, though. There were other things that would have been nice to build, but as a society, we decided we're not going to build those. So next picture. So in the Northwest, we have two kinds of high water events, and I stole this slide right from the Water Management Department. In the spring, May through July, snow melts due to temperature and precipitation, and that's what the 48 flood was all about. For the winter events, how many of you remember 1996? The big flood in 1996. Okay. So November through March, generally, you get frozen ground, you get a sustained rain, and you get lots and lots and lots of water coming down. So those are the two types of flood. You go ahead. So in 1996, if you were not around, this is the seawall in Portland, reinforced and raised. According to one author, we came within about 2 or 3 inches of $2 billion worth of damage. I'll say that again, 2 to 3 inches of $2 billion worth of damage to downtown Portland. There was a big surprise. This is the flood curve on the Willamette. So the first red line here is flood stage, which is 18 feet. The top line is the top of the seawall. See how close that was? Way too close. Way too close. Next one, please. It's always nice for the Corps of Engineers to get good reviews from the Oregonian. We really save these when we get them. And in this one that says, how they saved downtown. The Army Corps of Engineers manipulated the water flow of 60 dams to keep the Willamette from flooding Portland. That's the success story of the 1996 flood. So that round of applause you gave was for these people for doing that as well. Okay? Yeah. So who are the water management people? In the Corps of Engineers, there's a hydraulic engineering and power branch. Can you raise your hand if you work for them? There's one. Okay. And then there's also the Reservoir Control Center. And I've listed what they do underneath. I'm not going to, but suffice it to say, they keep track of the water, folks. And they keep it where it needs to be. Okay. If you're an engineer, this is what the river system looks like. It's very linear, but there are two different shapes here. Some of the shapes are kind of a U shape, some of them are kind of a bar shape. The bar shaped ones are called run-of-the-river dams, like Bonneville Dam, like the Dalles Dam. The U-shaped ones are storage dams. So we talked about the storage dams earlier, and those are the ones that prevent floods. Those are the ones that can be used to keep Portland, keep your feet dry, okay? So let's move to the next one. Again, if you like bar graphs, these are the different dams, and the big ones, of the 5 biggest ones, 4 of them were built really after the 1948 flood. Grand Coulee was modified after the 1948 flood. They got better, what's the word? Help me with this. Drainage, or, yeah. That's not the right word, but I'll think about it. But anyway, those are the dams that really make a difference when it comes to flood storage. Now, I like this picture because it shows you different years. And you'll see that, let me show you 1948. 1948 is here. You notice this is how much water went down the river. You'll notice that many years there's more water going down the river than there was in 1948. What's important, though, is how quickly the water comes down. If it all comes down at once, we have a problem. So there have been events where we've had more water, but just not all concentrated at one time, like in 1948. So that's really what makes a difference. So some things to remember, as far as the Corps of Engineers goes, we are in the flood damage reduction business, not flood control. Can you control floods? To some extent, but what we really are trying to do is reduce the damage. That's what we're all about. We operate infrastructure, and that infrastructure requires maintenance. It requires funding to get that maintenance. So that's something, it's just a reality out there. Now, some functions of the Columbia dams are funded by electrical customers, and for that we thank you. But some functions are only funded by congressional appropriations. So that's something that influences us every day, or affects us every day. And we manage multiple uses of the dam. After the 48 flood, Harry Truman, president, came to the Northwest, and he said, we need to manage this river for flood control, for navigation, for hydropower, for irrigation. And that's what we do. We look at all these different uses of the river. And that's how we operate the river at this point. Now, what can you do? So maybe if you're thinking of buying some property, look at potential risks from floods, fires, earthquakes, whatever it happens to be. My wife had us build a kit, put a kit together in case of emergency. And if you want to make your own kit about how to prevent yourself from becoming a statistic in an emergency, www.ready.gov has kits for all occasions, floods, fires, you name it. And then another thing you can do is volunteer with your local emergency department, whatever emergency department you have strong interest with, Red Cross or whatever it is. That's a way that you can help as well. So if you want to get engaged in this process, there are several ways you can do that. And then we do have a piece of paper up here that gives you more information in case you're curious now and you want to read more or research more about the Columbia River and about the flood of 1948, the Vanport flood. We have some resources, so pick up one of these pieces of paper before you head out today. Okay? All right. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn this over to Lynn.
All right. Okay. I just called mine the 1948 flood, and I cannot take credit for the photos because I wasn't around. I borrowed them from the Troutdale Historical Society, and I'm not here in an official capacity, but I am here as part of the Troutdale Historical Society. Some of you know it well. I see some real familiar faces out there, and welcome to all of you. And I am guessing that this crowd is just a little bit bigger than what the McMenamins people expected. So, awesome. Very, very cool. I want to thank McMenamins first for hosting this. Tim Hill is, yes, McMenamins. Tim Hill is the historian, and obviously we met Sam Fortner earlier. Orlando is over here videotaping the entire thing, and in a few days it will be posted on YouTube as part of the McMenamins portion of YouTube. I didn't know that you could buy your own portion, but I guess you can. I also have to confess that I am not an expert on this flood. I am going to show you information about it. I'm going to show you a lot of pictures about it, but I am not an expert. I do have some experts in the audience, though, that came because they have firsthand experience with the flood. And they will be called on at the appropriate moment. I'd also like you to think about Troutdale as being representative of communities all the way up and down the Columbia River. There was only one community that was severely threatened by this flood. Okay, let's see if my remote works. Okay, big picture, Sandy to the Willamette River. That's the part I am going to focus on. Just the Sandy River. Where is the pointer there? There it is. The Sandy River is over here, and we've got some light coming in on it, so you can't see it very well. That right there is the levee that is protecting the Sandy River, or protecting us from the Sandy. Oh, thank you, Orlando. Awesome. I don't think we're seeing the entire thing. That is not the entire slide. Why is it not showing? Excuse me for just a moment. That is the Fairview Avenue levee. Okay, escape. Technical difficulties here. Where is that? I have to go to my menu here. Excuse me while I change the resolution to make sure that it all fits in here. Hardware displays. Oh, that's not what I want to do. That's not going to make it work. Okay. Nope, that didn't. Let's go up to here and try that. Okay. We'll give it a shot. Now we have it.
That was really good, Lynn.
Thank you, Sharon. Sharon Nesbitt, for those of you who don't know her.
Did that, but I'm impressed.
Okay. Yeah, I was impressed that I recognized that we had a Fairview Avenue levee there. Sandy River levee is right there. Sorry for the shakiness. Not normally so shaky. Right there. That's the Sandy River right there on the edge. And that's the Sandy River mouth. Right there is the Fairview Avenue, or 232, is that correct? Yeah. 223, okay, levee. This is Blue Lake and Fairview Lake. So, we have the Columbia River, Sandy River, Smith and Bybee Lakes, way over there on the west end. We have the Railroad Levee, of which you have already heard. We have the 33rd Avenue Levee, which, by the way, is just to the west of the Portland Airport, right there. This map, by the way, came from the Multnomah County Drainage District, courtesy of Mandy O'Hara. Is Mandy O'Hara in the audience? Okay, she didn't say whether she was or was not going to come, but I thank her for that. And the Drainage District as well. Okay, we have the 223rd, and we have the Sandy River levee. These are the levees that protect all of that lowland in this drainage area that was once floodplain. We kind of took away floodplain when we put those levees in. And one key kind of item, the smelter in Troutdale, which is no longer, it is now the FedEx facility on that site. It was the Reynolds Metal Aluminum smelter after the war. For those of you who are really, really young, Will, that would be you. After the war means World War II. 1945 it ended. Okay, some key things to keep in mind. And one of them is the Troutdale Airport, the former Reynolds Metals, and Sundial. And we have a couple of sisters here from the Sundial Marina, and I see Jeannie and Jackie. Good. Okay. Sundial Marina, right to the west of the mouth of the Sandy, right about in this area right here. I launched a boat, or I used to launch a boat there. We have the Sandy River, the Reynolds Metals plant, and the Troutdale Airport. Sundial Beach and Marina. Okay. This is what Sundial Marina looked like. Whoop, too far. There. Probably late May. Is that correct, Jackie? Okay. Jackie or Jeannie, can you tell us who is this in the picture right here next to your mom? That's the younger sister, Elaine. Okay. Okay, your dad on the left, I'm thinking, and on the right, we don't know? Okay. This was a common way of getting from place to place during that 48 flood. rowing out to the floating office building, which isn't so floating at this particular moment. That was your house, okay. And Gabe, Quaddy, and daughter Jeannie, 10 years old. Jeannie, would you stand up now and kind of give a wave to everybody? This is Jeannie. In this picture here, she's the girl in the bathing suit. So, yeah, that's Jeannie. Okay. Any real intense memories you would like to share? Or have I shared enough? Jackie? Everything you owned was gone. Okay, so everything that was in the fishermen's lockers, because they had lockers where fishermen could store stuff, was put in rowboat boats, and they took them over to. Yeah. And where did you live during the flood? Okay. On the higher ground. Oh. Up on the hill with the Alexanders. Isn't it great to have friends? All right. All right. Those are only two of the people I'm going to put on the spot. Okay, and that is Harris Quaddy, their dad, and the water has obviously subsided. Still kind of a wreck. That's the house afterwards. And if I remember right, the house ended up being on pontoons. Yeah, pontoons, locks. Yeah. Huh. Okay. As high as the levee, okay. All right, and just a little more from the marina. So, and if you remember back in that picture, this whole area was on the outside of the levees. And so there was no protection whatsoever. Okay, moving on. In 1942, the Port of Portland, which owns your Portland International Airport, purchased the Troutdale Airport. And it served as a reliever airport for the commercial traffic until the 50s. And from their website it says, Troutdale Airport was especially useful in 1948 when the current Portland International Airport was covered for several months by water as a result of the Vanport flood. That's for those of you who can't see what I typed there because you're so far back. It was much, much shorter then. If I remember right, it was a half-mile runway. Do you remember, Joe? Half-mile? It's much longer now. Okay, close enough, huh?
Yeah.
I saw that head nodding. And notice how it is protected by the levees. It's kind of deceptive in this picture because you cannot see the rise of ground, but here is where the high ground actually starts. It just kind of follows a line all the way up and down to Columbia. There's always a division somewhere. Okay, the key part here, this is looking to the north, and over there you can kind of see Camas, but this is I-84. Being built. Not done yet. Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. Troutdale Historical Society photo. Hardly any farming happened that year in those lowlands, those rich lowlands. If you were a farmer, it was kind of a toast of a year. Asparagus, maybe? I don't know.
Rice.
Rice. To me, it appears that the levee is being added to in here, and these are pump pipes running to dump it back into all of this flooded area between the Sandy and the Columbia rivers. Trying to get some of it out of there. A phenomenon that happened, and I didn't know about this until I did this show several years ago, was the phenomenon of sand boils. Does anybody remember what those are or know what they are? A few of you who were there at the show probably do. Apparently when the water seeps through underneath, because we're talking sand here, it'll find little passageways, and when it gets to a lowland area, it'll just suddenly start bubbling up, just like a pot boiling. And so it's called a sand boil. And one of the jobs of the crews from the Army was to go around with sandbags and just dump sandbag after sandbag after sandbag on top of these sand boils to keep them controlled. I suspect that it was kind of like going around thumping mold hills, because you dump in one place and you come up in another. Just non-stop. This is the railroad bridge over the Sandy. And the Sandy River and Troutdale Bridge looking to the south. Now, towards the end of my show, I'm going to direct you back to this same photo, because this little piece of property right here became rather important in my life. Okay, now, upriver in these trees right here, I have a gentleman named Scott Cunningham who's going to tell a little bit of a story here about his girlfriend's dad's house.
Well, first I would like to tell you that I was going to the University of Portland, and I was just a freshman, and somebody came by and said, "We need help, we need help." And they were just screaming as they went through the dorms. And so we worked all night long setting up beds for people in every church and every school in North Portland. And these poor people that coming in from Vanport were just in shock, you know. They were looking for their parts of their family. And so we put up a chart on the area who was staying there. And then this went all through all of the places that we set up. Well, we worked all night long. And it was really quite an experience. Well, then, I had been going with a girl. He was the new dentist here in Troutdale, and this was his daughter. And we had planned to be married in June. Well, when the Vanport flood broke, it flooded Troutdale. You'd go just as far as the city hall, and it was water all the way down. And they lived on Jackson Park Road, where Joe Callister and Baton lived later. There she is. And so we had a rowboat down below Tad's, and we'd go across the Stark Street Bridge and then row across the Sandy River where the house was. And it was just kind of up on a knoll, but everything around it was completely flooded. And the water got within about 4 to 6 inches from the floor. And poor Doc, he was really chagrined because he had bought that house first before he even knew he was going to be a dentist in Troutdale. But he just thought, wouldn't that be neat to live on the river? And the very first year they lived there, they had the flood. So they were evacuated, and they asked me if I would mind just staying there at the house to make sure nobody got in there to loot it or anything else. And so I just slept out on the ground there for a couple weeks, and then the water started going down. Well, Doc had a big chopping block down in the basement. And so I put on hip boots and then guide that parking or the chopping block back to the original place it was supposed to be. So I was really glad to see it finally get there. But anyway, that was the 1948 flood for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. And you said the water was within about 4 inches of the floorboards?
That's right.
Whoa. Okay.
That was a brand new car.
And a brake. Okay. Troutdale Bridge, upstream, looking down because, I'm looking at the walkway and it looks like it's on this side. There are on the piling to the west, if you go out there and look today in low water, you will see where somebody painted green water level markings in 1948. And it was that big of an event. And they're fading now, and kind of a shame. And this is what Scott was talking about. The City Hall was kind of directly back here. And, you know, just like downtown, people parking their boats. What else do you do? Okay, Sandy River Station. I like the sign on the building. Do not block driveway, please. I always called this the gingerbread house, but it's sitting up on a knoll and seems to have survived fairly well. And this is the rear of Ted Schulte's house. It's hard to see that. And I need to grab my notes. No, I need to grab Sharon's book, excuse me. Sharon is the author of it. It Could Have Been Carpdale, and she's done a fabulous job with all kinds of stories, including 1948 flood. Descendants of the captain's carp filled the backwater shallows along the Columbia River, and this is what Ted. Excuse me. This is the next one. I'm sorry. Oh yes, Ted Schulte, in the aftermath of the 1948 Vanport flood, heard noises one night in the flooded lawn outside his house, and peeked out to see hundreds of carp grazing on his inundated grass. That's where that one led. Back in the 1890s, Captain Harlow, later the son built the Harlow house, but he had a dream that he was going to get really, really rich by supplying carp to the Portland restaurants. And so he stocked his ponds with carp. $5 each in some cases. And I believe it was the 1894 flood that destroyed that dream and turned all the carp loose, or the dam broke or something in that era. Carp like grass. They are a problem. Excuse me. Just for reference, this is a house in which I grew up, in a different view of it right here. It was a restaurant called the Sandy River Lodge. I wish I had those signs. And the cabins of Ruby and Elliot Staten. They had a series of maybe 15 to 18 of them that they rented out. Mostly the transients, it seemed like. It was one of those little motorhome kind of jobbies on the highway where people stayed, kind of like a modern motel. But some people stayed there long term as well. In this case, not so long term. And this is the historic Columbia River Highway, and if you look closely, If you did happen to get a shot at the poster that McMenamin's put out for this event, which is why some of you are here, that's the photo from which it was taken. The Dalles, 77. You have to go back a few slides to think about that, because now we don't get to the Dalles by this way, but back in the day, this was the way through Troutdale. Troutdale Sand and Gravel Bunker. Some of you in the back can't see very well, but the gravel and sand trucks are parked up on top of the ramps. We've dumped them into the bunker, so this is on the other side. Not sure who owned it at that point, either Dick Narr or Russ Aiken, one of the two. And again, you got around by boat. And just some cool photos. That is the historic Columbia River Highway. By horse, by boat, by car. Okay, let's get to May 30th of 48. Pat did a fabulous job of leading up to this. Okay. On May 30th of 48 at 4:17 p.m., this is Smith Lake right here. This is the railroad levee right here. It broke. Water flowed that way. The 33rd Avenue levee stopped it, but that whole lowland was totally flooded. And I read, you asked if I'd seen a different number. You had 15, I believe. I saw 15 in some places, 16 lives lost in another. There wasn't a real true consensus anywhere. 15 seemed to be more common. Okay, so we have water up to 33rd. Now, let's talk about the former Reynolds Metal site just a bit. We've got this levee, which is the Fairview Avenue levee, and that 33rd Avenue levee in place still. I did a little research and found out that aluminum melts at 1,221 degrees Fahrenheit. Typically, a smelter will run at 1,760 degrees Fahrenheit. And these people who are running this plant are going full tilt, and I can't, 7 pot lines or something like that, at this temperature. And they have these sand boils coming up here, there, and everywhere. And go up a slide. The only thing between the $43 million reduction plant and the river was an earthen dike 18 feet high and 60 feet wide at the base. A stronger dike than that had failed at Vanport. That's from the Gresham Outlook, and it's a retrospective look from May 31 of 1978 by Sharon Nesbitt. If the dike failed, nearly 10 feet of water would wash into the aluminum plant. Worse, the cold water meeting the molten metal in the pot lines could cause the whole plant to blow. By June 2nd, the risk of flood was too great to keep the pot lines in operation. I don't know much about the aluminum business, but I'm guessing that it took a period of days to shut down those pot lines, and just for that amount of metal to cool took a while as well. And I'm going to read the cards to you, and I apologize for reading to you, but some of you are way back there. Okay, bags were flown in from Memphis and other Mississippi River points. Between 2.5 million and 3 million bags were used. That was a quote from Sam Cox. And these, if I'm making a guess here, I believe they're called ducks. Okay, some of you from that era would recognize them. That was a World War II vehicle, and it was used as a landing vehicle. Army convoy at 5 a.m. Sam says he shared one of these tents with other foremen as an office. Must have been a tour. On June 11th, at about midnight, the 33rd Avenue dike was pierced, and the Columbia River flowed into the 8,500 acres of lowland. The Campbell Road, 223rd, also known as Fairview Avenue, dike was the last defense. Again, from Sharon. Sharon, would you raise your hand so people know who I'm talking about? There, Sharon is right there. Thank you, Sharon. Okay. Actually, the water is a little further than what my arrow shows. It actually comes up to here. And notice that on this side of the dike, the levee there on Fairview Avenue, is Blue Lake and Fairview Lake, and I left them clear on purpose in the hopes that a guy named Nick Welsh would be here. Nick, would you raise your hand? And Nick, would you, in a big voice, tell people what life was like then? Because you have to go back a little bit and tell people about your history.
Well, we lived there when the dike broke.
I don't know if it'll reach. Let me see.
Yes, come on.
Let's see if it reaches. We are in luck.
Okay, we lived there at the time, not expecting the dike to break, of course, but it came up, the park, Blue Lake Park was wide open. It was one of those hot days that in the park business you hope for. And it was a great day. My dad got on the PA system to announce that the Vanport flood, or the dike at Vanport had broken. Everyone must go home. And there was a great crowd of people zooming out of the park, trying to get home. Of course, the water didn't reach us and actually never got in Blue Lake in any of that time. So we worked there in the park all summer long until the water finally receded.
It was not a publicly owned park at the time. Nick's family owned it, correct?
Right.
At what point did it get sold to Multnomah County Metro? 60s? Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Okay. If I'm sitting there at the Reynolds metal plant, I am hoping that metal has cooled. Okay. This is the new Fairview Avenue. I always take a chance when I do this, but notice what we have here, these jerry cans full of gasoline. I heard a chuckle out there because somebody knows where I'm headed. We're just very casual about where and when we smoke. Yeah, OSHA might object. I heard the OSHA. Exactly. Okay. The dikes were shaking like a bowl full of Jell-O. As recently as 1996, I remember Marine Drive being closed to at least heavy truck traffic, if not all vehicles. That was by Fred Becker from Gresham, quoted in Gresham Outlook. Again, my favorite reporter, Sharon Nesbitt. Okay, June 11th, 1948 proved to be the last surge of high water, and the aluminum plant was safe. Water slowly began to recede. Now, I'm going to throw a personal note in here, which I don't always do, but I do have a very strong personal note here. We're going to talk about Vanport. Remember, Dikes are safe at present. You will be warned if necessary. You will have time to leave. Don't get excited. Okay, that was the Housing Authority of Portland, the bulletin to Vanport residents, Sunday morning. Notice the date, May 30th, 1948. Don't get excited. Okay. My mother lived in Vanport. She was a transplanted Connecticut Yankee and had decided to go to college at what was then Vanport College. Later it evolved into Portland State University once everything was destroyed here. So you will hear a Vanport memory, hopefully.
The weather had become very warm. Went to bed, got up in the morning, and under the door we found a sheet which said something to the effect that if we were going to be flooded out, that there would be a fire alarm type thing sounding off. So, of course, they were thinking in terms of the water coming over the levee. And about, I don't know, sometime in the afternoon, 4:30, somewhere in there, we heard the alarms go off, and I told Doris, we better get out. And so she picked up her luggage, which she had, and I threw some things into a suitcase and into a pillowcase. And at that point, there was a pounding on the door, and anybody said, anybody in there? And I said, yes. And he said, for God's sakes, get out. So I went to the door and looked, and about a block and a half away, I could see the water coming. So I said, Doris, let's get out. And she grabbed her suitcase. I grabbed what I thought I had packed and the pillowcase. It ended up that I had an empty suitcase, and we ran out to the street, and there was a Pepsi truck, and just as we got onto the Pepsi truck, the water went under the truck, but we were fine, and they took us to the highway, and we climbed the bank up to the road where I met my future husband at that point. Since I had sirens went off, I put in a phone call to Glenn, and it was probably one of the last calls that went out from there. And he met us, and there was such a crowd that we had to walk probably 3/4 of a mile to where he had parked.
The Army Corps of Engineers said that the levee was not going to break.
They said the levee wasn't going to break, but it did break under the railroad bridge. Well, they thought that more people had been drowned than actually were. But being a holiday weekend, a lot of people were gone. Thank God.
Did you go back afterwards?
2 months after, I picked up clothes and they fell apart in my hands. My school books were totally destroyed. The only thing I managed to pick out was some of my gold jewelry, which I had left there. I had left a music box, which was in pieces at that point.
You went back 2 months later.
2 months.
Why?
Because that was when I went back as soon as they allowed us to go back. And everything by that time was rotted. And the reason that they didn't let us in sooner was that the water took a long time to drop.
What did you feel when you went back?
I guess a sense of futility for even having bothered to go back, I think. But other than that, it was done, and I think we all had moved on, so 2 months was maybe a good thing.
There's a lady in our audience who had arranged a flight for, I believe it was your sister and your folks, your mother and dad. And will you talk about that just a moment? This is Joe Callister.
I was working at the Troutdale Airport at the time. I was married in November of that year, and so I was working at the airport, and I was at the flight desk where I was issuing out planes and all that kind of stuff, because people wanted to go up and look at the flood and see all the flood water and where it was going, and so I arranged to have my dad and mom and my sister have an airplane flight. I don't know, probably 15 minutes or a half an hour. I don't remember that detail. But they went up on this famous afternoon, and they just happened to be flying over the levee when it broke. And they saw the water rushing into Vanport. And they came back and they were so excited. And of course the pilot just brought her right back immediately, but it was a real experience for them. And I talked to my sister yesterday. She's going to be 94 next month, and she still remembers it.
Thank you. We got that. Okay, I'm going to skip part of what I was going to do. I was going to read to you, but I'm not going to because I'm quite a bit over time. Forgive me. Okay, let me do a little retro thinking here. Okay, January of 1949, Glenn and Helen Otto were married. That's my folks. 1950, Glenn and Helen purchased a particular piece of property in Troutdale. It happens to be the property in the lower right corner, right down there. A little bit downstream from the McPhersons and later the Callisters. That's where I grew up. Nice, by the way, it was idyllic. A just fabulous place to grow up. I can't recommend it highly enough. Okay, 1951, Glenn and Helen moved to Troutdale. December 1964, oops, that's what it looked like. We had to evacuate. We left for about a week. We didn't know if we were going to come back to a house or not. The water came within about a foot of the foundation. Story's not over. My mother teaches me the meaning of the sentence, I'm a nervous wreck. I always remember those words from her. Okay, Keith, are you in the audience still? Keith is still in the audience. My friend Keith, when he heard I was doing this, said, I have some old film, and it's kind of like Pat's, and a little bit jumpy and jerky. It was not professionally done. It was, however, slowed down, so some of the jumpiness and jerkiness is taken out of it. This is about a third of what you gave me, Keith. It is silent. Oh, that one, hello, not quite yet. That one wants a click, excuse me. Okay, this is
Oh, cool.
Vanport. Yeah, Vanport.
That's Vanport. Wow.
By the way, the population that was affected was disproportionately African American. About a quarter to a third of the population in Vanport was that, because they weren't allowed to live anywhere else. Portland was known as one of the whitest cities in the country. Huge amount of discrimination.
Is that Marine Drive?
I believe it is, yes. And the water has obviously receded a fair amount just by looking at where some of the debris is piled. A lot of salvaging going on. Every boat or vehicle on the water I saw that was moving has one of those yellow flags, so it must have been a standard. If you're going out on the water, you have to have a flag. Thank you for being here tonight.
Good job.
Thank you, Scott. A couple last things. I'm going to return to one thing that Sam talked about, and that's Abraham Lincoln and the Oregon Country, Tuesday, May 27th, down at the power station. And my wife and I are regulars down there. It's a great place to get an education on the pieces that you might have missed out on. And it's free. It happens to be about the one and only time most months that we end up going out. Okay, Troutdale Historical Society. There's a little advertisement, excuse me. We are building an exhibit. It is called King of Roads, Byway of the People. Feel like you're a little bit of a captive audience right now? Okay. It is going to take quite a lot of money to build because we are aiming for a really classy exhibit. We need your help. We are going to celebrate the people who built and the people who are preserving and restoring and promoting this fabulous piece of history that we have in our backyard called the historic Columbia River Highway. The centennial of it will be in 2016. We aim to open our exhibit approximately 1 year from now. And if you would like more information, I have some brochures up here. Also, don't forget that Patrick and I put together for further research if you're interested in the flood up here as well. We are open to questions as well. We're both still here. Thank you again for being here.